Imagine yourself on the tarmac of a small airport, cold rain hitting the wings of a stolen plane. Colton Harris Moore is inside the cockpit, staring at the instruments he only knows from video games. His mission is simple: escape the United States and reach Canada. But as he reaches altitude, his heart sinks. The gas gauge is plummeting. He is running out of fuel. He cannot go back to the airport because the federal agents are already there, waiting to put him in handcuffs. Instead, he spots a small, flat clearing nestled deep within the jagged peaks of the mountains. He aligns the nose, drops the flaps, prays to God, and braces for impact. Miraculously, the plane makes it down, and Colton walks away alive. This is incredible not just because Colton had no pilot's license, but because Colton Harris Moore was only 16 years old. By the end of his run, he would steal 6 airplanes, dozens of luxury cars, and commit 67 felonies across 3 different countries. He would spend 3 years on the run from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, becoming one of the most elusive fugitives in modern history. Colton Harris Moore is the wildest story of a bad kid that the world has ever seen. But to understand the bandit, you have to understand the boy who was born into a nightmare. Colton was not the popular kid in school. He was the outcast. Bullies targeted him, classmates ignored him, and all he wanted was what the other children had: a warm home, a simple meal, and parents who cared. Instead, his mother was a severe alcoholic, and his father was long gone, never paying a cent in child support. Colton lived in a trailer park on Kimono Island, Washington, often forced to forage in the woods or scrounge through trash for something to eat. One day, a new boy joined his class and changed Colton's trajectory. His name was Harley Ironwing Davidson, and unlike Colton, Harley stood up to the bullies. Harley had just finished a 2-year sentence in juvenile detention, but he possessed everything Colton craved: a new bike, a laptop, and an iPod. The secret was simple: everything Harley owned was stolen. Colton had only stolen food to survive, but Harley showed him that crime could be a ladder to a better life. During a midnight meeting in a quiet cul-de-sac, Harley taught Colton the rules of the trade. Never rob a house if you know who lives there. Never turn on the lights. If you get caught, run and never look back. Harley's philosophy was twisted. He claimed that stealing from people with insurance was a victimless crime because the insurance companies would just pay them back. To a hungry, desperate teenager, this logic sounded like a green light. Colton began breaking into dozens of vacation homes in the San Juan Islands. 1 in every 3 houses in that area is a seasonal home, meaning they sit empty for most of the year. It was the perfect playground for a young burglar. For a few weeks, Colton lived like a king, eating gourmet food from strangers' fridges, playing their video games, and sleeping in comfortable beds. But back at his real home, the situation was deteriorating. His mother was now physically addicted to alcohol. Colton tried to check her into rehab, but she burned the intake handbooks in front of his face. Child Protective Services was called dozens of times as physical fights broke out between them. Eventually, she threw him out into the streets. At the age of 15, Colton was living in a tent in the middle of the forest, raiding neighborhoods for frozen pizzas and chicken tenders. The rumors of a ghost boy spread fast. Neighbors noticed their food disappearing, but the FBI soon realized it was more than just snacks. They raided his mother's trailer with a warrant for Colton Harris Moore, not for food, but for identity theft. He had moved on from pizzas to laptops, telescopes, credit cards, and forged licenses. When the feds swarmed the trailer, Colton was hiding under the floorboards, listening to their every word. The next day, a handwritten note appeared on his mother's door. It said the cops want to play and that this was no longer a game. It was a war. Colton was now a professional fugitive. He used stolen credit cards to buy lockpicks and night vision goggles. He would hide in the crawl spaces of houses while FBI helicopters circled overhead. He outran professional agents for months, escaping every time the police thought they had him cornered. For a 15-year-old to evade the world's most elite law enforcement agency was unheard of. However, Colton had one fatal habit. He loved to turn on the lights in the houses he occupied. When a neighbor noticed lights in a vacation home that was supposed to be empty, they called the police. This time, there was no escape. Colton was caught red-handed. At 16, Colton pleaded guilty to 3 counts of residential burglary and was sentenced to 3 years in a maximum security juvenile facility. For the first time, Colton had structure. He focused on his schoolwork and began reading everything he could find about aviation. His grades improved, and after 10 months of good behavior, he was transferred to a less restrictive group home. It seemed like Colton was finally turning his life around. But in the middle of the night, during a routine body count, the guards found an empty bed and an unlocked window. Colton had escaped with a 1-hour head start. The manhunt was back on, and the public was furious. The police offered a deal: turn himself in, and only serve an additional 28 days. If he refused, he would be a fugitive for life. At 17, with a brain not yet fully developed, Colton kept running. He tried to find his old friend Harley, only to discover that Harley was in prison for trying to steal a 1,000-pound safe from his own mother's church. With nowhere to go, Colton went back to what he knew best: breaking and entering. One night, police pursued a stolen Mercedes-Benz driving at 100 miles per hour. The car crashed into a tree, and the driver vanished into the woods. Inside the car, police found a backpack filled with stolen IDs and a digital camera. On that camera were selfies of Colton Harris Moore sporting a smug, Mona Lisa-like smile. That image soon appeared on wanted posters across the country. Throughout that summer, the legend grew. Colton had a Facebook fan page with 15,000 members. Gun shops sold out of ammo as residents grew terrified of the barefoot bandit who left chalk outlines of his bare feet at crime scenes. Colton's most daring act was yet to come. He began stalking the local airport on Orcas Island, watching the staff from the woods. He chose a brand new Cessna 182 Skyline. He had flown this exact model in flight simulator video games hundreds of times. He found the keys, read the owner's manual on the seat, rolled the plane onto the runway, and took off into the mountains. He flew without a license, avoiding restricted airspace and staying under 18,000 feet where air traffic control wouldn't bother him. But landing is the hardest part. He hadn't checked the fuel before leaving. He crash-landed in the mountains, destroying the plane, but he survived and disappeared into the forest again. For 6 months, the islands were quiet. Some thought Colton was dead. Then, he reappeared by breaking into a police car and stealing an officer's rifle, laptop, and breathalyzer. He was now armed, and the stakes were higher than ever. To his fans, he was a modern-day Robin Hood, a kid sticking it to the system during the Great Recession of 2010. On September 8th, he stole a $250,000 boat, drove it to Friday Harbor, and then stole a $1 million airplane. He crashed that one too, but he wasn't done. He stole a twin-engine boat and headed for the Canadian border. Colton road-tripped across North America, stealing cars and leaving them when they ran out of gas because gas stations had cameras. He eventually stole another plane in Idaho and flew it all the way back to Washington, landing safely in the mountains. He was living in empty vacation homes, leaving footprints and the message "See ya" for the police. The media dubbed him the Barefoot Bandit. He was outsmarting the FBI, Homeland Security, and the Canadian Mounties. By May 2010, Colton was a folk hero. He left a letter and extra cash at an Oregon animal hospital with a note saying the money should be used for the care of the animals. It was a brilliant PR move. But the FBI was closing in. They searched his mother's house every day while she fell deeper into alcoholism, wondering if her son was even alive. Colton continued his trek, eventually reaching Yankton, South Dakota. In South Dakota, he broke into a house at midnight, thinking the owners were on vacation. He washed his clothes, cooked some chicken tenders, gave himself a haircut, and took a shower. But at 3 a.m, the family returned. The father, a 340-pound man, noticed the TV was on and the bathroom door was closed. When he tried to open it, Colton slammed it shut. The father muscled it open, and a naked Colton Harris Moore, covered in lotion, sprinted for the basement. When the father cornered him, Colton pointed a handgun with a red laser at the man's chest. The family fled the house and called 911. SWAT teams and bloodhounds swarmed the area, but Colton had already smashed the washing machine to get his wet clothes, slipped out of a tiny basement window, stolen the neighbor's car keys, and vanished again. The FBI knew Colton's pattern. He always stayed near small airports. Homeland Security warned every private pilot in the region to lock their planes. Colton watched these meetings from the woods. On the 4th of July, he snuck into a hangar and rolled out a Cessna 400, a $700,000 aircraft. He filled it with gas, went through the checklist, and took off heading south. He intended to reach Cuba because they had no extradition treaty with the United States. But instead of Cuba, he flew toward the Bahamas and began running out of fuel over the ocean. He spotted a patch of sand between palm trees on a small island. He lowered the flaps and landed. The wheels got stuck in the wet sand, nosediving the plane and triggering the emergency locator transmitter. Colton walked away uninjured and disappeared into the jungle. The U.S. Coast Guard received the SOS signal and contacted the plane's owner in Indiana. The owner was shocked. He thought his plane was safe in a hangar. Within minutes, the Bahamian Defense Force was notified that Colton Harris Moore had arrived in their country. Colton picked a perfect time to hide. It was 4th of July weekend, and the islands were crawling with tourists. For a week, he squatted in empty vacation homes, staying one step ahead of a military-led manhunt. One Tuesday night, he even sat in a local bar and had a beer. He looked like any other tourist. But the FBI's wanted posters were everywhere. On a nearby island, during a beach party with music and tiki torches, a boat glided up to the dock. A young white boy yelled out, "Did you hear about the plane that crashed?" When the locals asked who he was, he replied, "Colton Harris Moore." He told the locals he was bored and wanted them to call the cops so he could be chased for real. When they pulled out their phones, he screamed, "I'm gone! Read about me on the internet!" and sped away into the bay. He headed for Harbor Island, a place filled with hotels and crowded docks. He abandoned his boat and sprinted toward a hotel with a gun in a bag. A security guard chased him but backed off when he saw the pistol. The guard took the keys from Colton's boat so he couldn't use it to escape. Every officer and armed citizen on the island began combing the bushes. At 3:30 in the morning, a police officer stepped off a dock to use the restroom. He heard a man jump into a nearby boat and start the engine. It was Colton. A high-speed chase erupted in the dark ocean. Police boats and officers with machine guns pursued Colton, but his stolen boat was faster. Just as Colton was watching the police lights fade on the horizon, he felt a violent jolt. He had hit a sandbar. He tried to give it more gas, but it only dug the boat deeper into the sand. He was stuck. His 2-year run was over. Colton held his gun to his head, refusing to surrender for several minutes. He fired one shot into the air before the police peppered the hull of the boat with 20 rounds. As the smoke cleared, Colton finally raised his hands. He was done. Remarkably, the Bahamian police captured him without a single fatality. He was wanted by the FBI, the U.S. Marshals, Canadian Mounties, and dozens of local departments. The Bahamas paraded him in a perp walk, but they only ended up charging him with one crime, failing to present a passport. He was fined $300, which the U.S. Embassy paid, and he was promptly extradited back to the United States. American prosecutors had to wrap 67 felonies into one case. Colton faced up to 30 years in prison. He hired John Henry Brown, the famous attorney who had once defended Ted Bundy. His restitution was calculated at a staggering $1.4 million. To pay back the victims, the court mandated that he sell the rights to his life story to Fox Entertainment for $1 million. The court ruled that Colton could never personally profit from his crimes. No books, no movies, no merchandise. In court, his attorney showed that Colton's home life was a tragedy. He had been diagnosed with fetal alcohol syndrome because of his mother's drinking during pregnancy. He had been neglected and abused his entire life. The judge expressed sympathy for his upbringing, calling the case a tragedy but also a triumph of the human spirit for surviving such conditions. Colton was sentenced to 6 years in prison. A decade later, Colton Harris Moore is a free man. He has given few interviews and says he hates the nickname the Barefoot Bandit. He wishes to move on from his past and live a quiet life. Attempts to contact him for his side of the story have gone unanswered. Friends say he has changed his number and gone off the grid once again, but this time, he isn't looking to be found. He proved that a kid with nothing could outrun the world, but in the end, you can never outrun yourself.